Okay. Hi, everyone. We are group 4. We are going to go over chapter 5, which is over individuals with disabilities. My name is Riley Burke.
I am Trish Kuiper.
And I'm Clay Carlton.
Perfect. The first sections that we'll be talking about on our slides goes over the Individuals with Disabilities Act. This started in 1990, but there in 1975, Congress passed the first act for individuals with special needs, and that was called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And that started in 1975. And that stayed in place and was followed until 1990 when IDEA was developed. And IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then that was amended in 2004. And they just pretty much everything stayed the same. It is now just called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act was what they added. But what this is federal law for students who have a verified disability between the ages of 3 and 21 years of age. And it just ensures that they're going to receive FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. And there is a council, the National Council on Disability, the NCD, and that's composed of 15 members appointed by Congress. And they kind of make sure that we follow the laws that are outlined in IDEA. They promote policies, programs, practices, and procedures, just making sure that there's equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities. And then when somebody is verified with a disability, you're going to have that the IEP, and within that IEP, Clayton, I'm trying to figure out what slide I'm on here.
I'm trying to follow along in the book.
No, I know it's hard. I think go to the next one.
Okay.
Oh, here, yeah, this one. Yeah, right there, that second point. That's what I was looking at. So there are verified areas that IDEA says you can qualify under. The state of Nebraska has 13 verifiable disabilities that you can qualify under. Some of the language is a little different. Instead of mental retardation, we say developmental disability now. In Nebraska, we have autism as one of our verifications, and emotional disturbance is one, also known previously as a behavior disorder. So you have to have one of those verified disabilities in order to qualify for an IEP. But prior to that, so now I think you can go to the next couple slides. The IEP is basically going to outline what the student's program is going to look like. So you're creating an individualized program for them. It's just going to go through their present levels of performance, kind of like where they're at now. And then what are we going to do? How are we going to get them to improve? And you're going to write goals in the areas that they are verified in. And that helps us keep track of how the student is progressing. And this IEP meeting happens annually. But prior to an IEP, a couple more slides down, Clayton, is the response to intervention. And this is my last topic. And this is pretty much like an early intervention. We want to make sure that there's effective assistance and support available to students prior to maybe being referred to for a referral for special education, and making sure that if they're having trouble learning, that we're providing those the right supports This helps identify students that might have a learning disability. Early intervention is research-based and provides instructional interventions. And that kind of goes through the different tiers. If you picture a triangle, levels 1, 2, and 3. Everyone gets level 1. Some of these students on an IEP and who might need response to intervention services might be to level 2 or 3. And that would sum up mine.
All right, so I had equal access to assistive technology for disabled students. And it just starts off by saying that technology-related assistance for individuals with the Disability Act Amendment 1994 provides financial assistance to the states to support systems which will assist in development and implementation of technology-related support for individuals with disabilities. So that means essentially they're going to ensure that districts have timely acquisition and delivery of assistive technology devices for students with disabilities, and those technologies are used to increase, maintain, or improve their functional capabilities. Could be a PDA for like a visually impaired student with a Braille keyboard or something like that. A PDA to take notes for students with disabilities that prevent them from functioning in the classroom, or just serve as dictionary spell checks, grammar checks, thesauruses. Program review and changes. Each IEP must be reviewed, revised annually, just to make sure that the child's needs are being met, and that if changes are going to be made, the legal guardian must be notified about those. So if either of those object to proposed changes, an impartial hearing must be held to resolve the conflict. If it proves to be unsuccessful, the parent or guardian may appeal to the state. That's about the program review and changes there. Our education-related service requirements. A related service is viewed as one that must be provided to allow this disabled child to benefit from special education. There's a couple interesting examples from the book that talked about clean intermittent catheterization, or a wheelchair user and a ventilator dependent student. And in both cases, it was ruled that they were supportive related services, and it wasn't excluded because of being a medical service. In the second one, with the wheelchair user and ventilator dependent student, they continually needed one-on-one care. The U.S. Supreme Court required that the district provide those nursing services during school hours to allow the student to benefit from a free and appropriate public education. So what that shows is that school districts will be required to provide any sort of simple medical procedure, even if it doesn't seem so simple to some teachers. Some of those will be ruled as something that you have to provide students. So in order for that student to benefit from an appropriate special education program. So some of the things that, some services that are required, along with those two examples that I just said, would include transportation, counseling, psychological services, physical therapy, speech pathology, audiology, and occupational therapy. All right, so the IDEA embraces the notion that children with disabilities be placed in educational settings that are the least restrictive when it is appropriate. The main objective to that is to provide the student the opportunity to interact and socialize and learn with regular students, and minimize the tendency to become stigmatized and isolated from the regular school programs that are being offered. If a student with disabilities is not going to be involved in a regular classroom instruction, the district must demonstrate through the IEP or an evaluation process that the segregated facility would be a more appropriate learning environment for that student. Least restrictive environment is kind of relative, so it is going to be what's good for that one student rather than might not be appropriate for another. So one student might need a regular classroom with regular teacher supports, regular class with special resource instruction. You could need a full-time special ed class in school, might need full-time special school or residential school, or in certain circumstances, homebound instruction. And the last one here is inclusion of children with disabilities. It's just an extension of mainstreaming. So the intent here is to ensure that when it's appropriate, that disabled children be placed in regular classrooms. And that's just designed to ensure that all children receive a free, appropriate education. Something that does need to be noted, I guess, is just the reasonable standard of care that must take place with students like this. So districts must ensure that a reasonable standard of care is going to be met when regular teachers are working with some of these students with disabilities that have different needs. They might deal with them one year, but not another, or have never dealt with something like that. So making sure that the entire staff is trained and able to provide at least a reasonable amount of care there for those particular students that they're going to have in the classroom. And that pretty much sums up my sections.
Okay, the next topic we wanted to cover is residential placement. So placing a child in a residential setting. These are typically incredibly expensive for the schools. And in most cases, they are more restrictive. So what Carlton was talking about, how we need to make sure that the student is always placed in the least restrictive environment. So IDEA does allow for placements if there is sufficient evidence that a residential placement is what's most appropriate. So that's saying if there's enough evidence to say that the only way that a child would be able to appropriately receive the services they need is in that residential placement, that's the only time that it would be appropriate, not just if it's easier on the school, but you have to have good proof for that one. I'll go to the next one there. The next part is isolation and restraint laws for students. Over the years, there have been a number of different laws that have been passed talking about when isolation and restraint is appropriate for students, when those types of services can occur. And typically these laws were made just to make sure that we're keeping our students with disabilities safe. So if you are a school that's using this practice, you need to make sure that you are up to date with your state's laws and that you have the correct paperwork for those type of occurrences. So the laws that have been passed concerning these different circumstances that isolation and restraint can occur, they include the different amounts of times that a student can be in there, the different types of isolations that can be used, the condition of the rooms that the school uses, whether or not there needs to be supervision in the room, and then if and how the parents need to be notified if that is used. And then the next slide. So like I said, if you are using this, you just want to make sure that you're doing exactly what your state has set up. So just make sure you know that before we're utilizing any type of isolation or restraint for our students. Okay, and then the next part is disciplining our students with disabilities. So all students in the class or in the school can be disciplined. However, when a student is identified with a disability, that adds another layer to it. So we just need to make sure that the behavior that is being displayed is not a manifestation of their disability, meaning that the behavior that we are punishing for isn't directly due to the child's disability. So if it is directly related to the disability, we cannot use the same type of punishment for a student with an IEP that we would for a student without an IEP. The decision of whether or not that behavior is a manifestation of their disability is made during a manifestation determinating meeting, and that's a meeting that includes that student's IEP's team. If it is determined that the behavior is not due to the disability, then that child may be disciplined by the school authorities as they would any typically developing other student. And then the next one. So when a team decides that there does need to be some type of discipline in order to help shape that student's behavior, the team just needs to make sure that they're deciding on a punishment that doesn't materially or substantially interrupt that child's education. So, you know, if, out of school suspension or those types of things, that's really going to take away time for the student's education. So just making sure that we're being cognizant of that and making sure that we are appropriately choosing a punishment that is actually going to help benefit the child. And that concludes chapter 5. Do you guys have anything else that you guys wanted to add?
No.
Okay.